I knew something was off the moment Dean called me Sunshine in front of the entire compliance team. It wasn't the nickname, though I've never once radiated sunshine energy unless you count my nuclear level tolerance for corporate bullshit. It was the way he said it, all smirk and swagger, like he'd already decided I was irrelevant. 12 years I'd worked in that office, 12 years of audits passed, filings submitted to the hour, and not a single federal fine. And here comes this clown with a $400 haircut and a three-ring binder pretending he invented the term lean operations. He slid into the director of ops chair like it was his birthright, kicked his feet up literally, and asked me during our first one-on-one, "So what exactly do you do here?" Besides highlight PDFs, I smiled. "I keep us out of federal prison." He laughed loud enough for the entire cube row to hear. "Oh, come on. No one's checking that stuff. It's all just paperwork." I made a mental note right then. Not of what he said, I'd heard worse from smoother idiots, but of how he said it. Like the rules were a game and I was just some uptight librarian who didn't get the joke. He dismissed 3 of my flagged issues that week, one export classification error, one missing subcontractor certificate, and a suspicious adjustment on a bid form, and each time, waved them off like I was asking for unicorn sighting. Sometime after he laughed off a missed deadline by saying we'll just backdate it, no biggie, I realized what I was up against. A man with just enough authority to be dangerous and none of the discipline to wield it. And by the way, since I know 90% of you are listening without subscribing, if this story makes you clench your jaw or mutter, "Yep, been there," hit the subscribe button. Tap like 2. It costs nothing, and it keeps the team caffeinated and petty enough to keep digging up these tales. Thanks. Now back to the mess. At first, I told myself he was just another loud mouth passing through. We've had turnover before. New execs come in, rattle the cage, think they are Elon Musk in khakis, and then quietly fade out once they realize government contracts don't move at Twitter speed. But Dean wasn't fading. He was flourishing. Within a month, he'd scheduled biweekly efficiency scrubs, basically meetings where he told experienced staff their roles could be automated. He proposed outsourcing document retention to a firm in Nevada with a website that looked like it was built in 1998. He started replying to my memo summaries with TL, DR, just gimme the highlights. Worse, he started making jokes. About me. "She's got a binder for everything," I heard him say once in the break room, and he didn't know I was behind the fridge door. Like she thinks the FBI is hiding under her desk. That one stung more than I admitted. Not because it was mean, hell, I've been called worse at parent-teacher conferences, but because it revealed just how little he grasped the stakes. We were a mid-sized contractor working with sensitive data on restricted components. One bad disclosure, one fudged timestamp, and we could be fined into oblivion. I knew that. Our legal team knew that. Even our intern, Gabby, knew that after 1 week of onboarding. But Dean? He just kept smiling and steamrolling like compliance was some optional side quest in his video game of cost-cutting hero. I tried, God help me, I tried to work with him. I documented every flagged item with footnotes and backup files. I sent gentle reminder emails. I looped in our general counsel on escalation threads, even sat through a 3-hour PowerPoint he titled Unclogging Bureaucratic Arteries without audibly groaning. None of it mattered. He'd already written me off. Worse still, the others started following his lead. Not overtly, nobody wants to get caught mocking compliance in a reply-all thread, but subtly. Emails started showing up with fewer attachments. "Can you approve this real quick?" became code for "don't read it too closely." I got dropped from calendar invites. A couple of directors stopped CCing me altogether. By the end of that quarter, I felt like a ghost in my own office. Present but not included. Still, I kept showing up. I kept documenting, because if I've learned one thing in 12 years, it's that compliance isn't about being liked. It's about being ready when the house of cards falls. And Dean? Dean was building his with gasoline and dental floss. It showed up as a PDF, innocently enough, buried in a weekly compliance packet I'd already reviewed 3 times. The report was labeled Final Export Controls Q2, except it wasn't the final version, not my final version. My original flagged a part number discrepancy, Category 3 Electronics, Sensitive Classification. I put a red box around it in the draft and wrote in bold, "Needs correction before submission, do not file as is." I even walked it down to Dean's office that day, put it on his desk and said, "This needs eyes before it goes anywhere." He nodded while scrolling his phone and said, Yeah, I'll look." I guess look meant forward to legal and slapped my initials on it. Because there it was, filed, timestamped 3 days ago with my section scrubbed clean and his name scrawled in digital ink at the bottom. The part number had been quietly changed back to the incorrect one. The report had been submitted, signed, filed, done. I sat at my desk staring at the screen like it had slapped me. You know that feeling when your stomach drops, but you're not scared yet, just confused? Like you missed something, maybe you screwed up. I opened my drafts folder, pulled up the last version I'd edited. Red box, still there, warnings, still bold. Metadata confirmed the time I'd last modified it. Nope, I hadn't missed a damn thing. I walked straight to Dean's office, knocked once, and stepped in. He looked up from his dual monitor setup like I'd just interrupted open heart surgery. "Hey, Sunshine, what's up?" I held up the printout. This report was filed with the wrong classification. I flagged it. You signed off on it. Did you read the draft I sent? He shrugged. Look, it's all the same paperwork. You're getting worked up over semantics. Semantics? I repeated. You're exaggerating. Nobody checks these things, he said, chuckling like I'd just warned him about Bigfoot. It's not like the feds have time to nitpick line items. That's when it hit me. He meant it. He meant to ignore me. This wasn't laziness. It wasn't an accident. It was a choice, a strategy, to bulldoze over my red flags like they were traffic cones in his personal racetrack to a performance bonus. I didn't answer him. I didn't argue. Arguing with men like Dean was like yelling into a hurricane, loud, exhausting, and ultimately pointless. I went back to my desk, closed the report, and opened a blank document titled Dean Incidents. It started small, one line: falsified export control submission Q2 altered classification Dean initialed without review. I timestamped it, backed it up to my encrypted thumb drive, saved a copy to cloud storage under a private alias, sent a dummy version to my personal email just in case. It wasn't about revenge. Not yet. It was about accuracy. Dean wanted to play games with federal filings? Fine, I'd play the long game. Over the next few days, things spiraled. Another report got filed early, missing the mandatory supplier certificate. Dean's initials again. A revised procurement log had 2 vendors with backdated contracts. I flagged it. He told me it's all paper noise. You worry too much. The word worry grated on me more than I expected, like it was a weakness. Caring about the law made me some kind of emotional liability. I started noticing patterns. My memos were opened and closed within seconds. Metadata didn't lie. Meeting invites I sent were declined or tentatively accepted, then ignored. Slack channels where I used to get tagged for input? Silent. Even legal stopped looping me in. When I asked Sarah, one of the attorneys, if I'd missed a new directive, she looked uncomfortable and said, Dean said you were transitioning into more of an internal advisory role. Internal advisory. That's corporate for stay in your lane and don't touch anything sharp. I didn't yell, didn't rant, I just nodded and walked out. But that night, I added a new folder to my archive, suppressed communications inside it, screenshots, email headers, Slack logs, read receipts. Everything. Because when the day came, and I knew it would, that the house of cards started to fall, I wanted to make sure no one accused me of being emotional, paranoid, or uninformed. I wasn't any of those things. I was documenting. The Monday morning email came with the subject line, Realignment of Responsibilities, Compliance, and Ops. I already knew what it was before I opened it. Dean had been circling the wagons for weeks, and this was the first cannonball. The body of the email was classic corporate theater. Streamline workflows and improve cross-functional synergy. We're consolidating certain compliance review tasks under operations. Translation? Dean was gutting my scope and shoveling my job into the lap of whichever analyst would ask the fewest questions. I scanned the list. Half my duties reassigned. My name nowhere near anything labeled approval authority. No one had spoken to me. No one had asked for input. And the kicker? I was now invited to audit meetings. Optional, non-speaking role, like a ghost invited to her own funeral. So I did what I always do. I documented. I added the email to the Dean incidents log, followed by a screenshot, timestamp, and internal version control tags. I drafted a memo to legal, noting the realignment contradicted our own policy framework, which required 2-point compliance review for any export documentation. Sent it, got no reply. Not even a thanks for the heads up. That was the beginning of what I came to call the quiet erasure. My calendar invites vanished one by one. I stopped getting tagged in threads. I'd walk into meetings only to find they'd been rescheduled without me. At first, I told myself it was an oversight. People were busy. Mistakes happen. Then I got the call from HR. Just checking in, the rep said, her voice oozing passive concern. There's been some feedback that you're maybe too rigid. You know, in your approach, too rigid? She laughed nervously. Not in a bad way, just maybe pick your battles a little more. The tone of some of your emails comes across as a little sharp. We're all trying to stay solution-oriented. Pick your battles. Translation, shut up, smile, and let the men who skim PDFs at lunch run the ship into an iceberg. I thanked her, hung up, logged the conversation. Later that week, I was refilling my mug in the break room when I heard Dean's voice from around the corner. He was talking to one of the new contractors, young guy, ex-military, freshly minted MBA, the type who says synergy without flinching. She's got this vibe, man, Dean said, chuckling. Acts like every little box check is national security, like we're gonna get raided by the feds because she didn't like a font. The contractor laughed. Isn't she like the compliance officer? Exactly. Compliance, not the FBI. She forgets who she works for. He wasn't whispering. He wasn't even trying to hide it. I stood frozen, one hand on the coffee pot, the other shaking ever so slightly. I didn't walk in, didn't make a scene. I just backed away and returned to my desk and added it to the log. Verbal denigration of role third-party witness break room timestamped audio recording. Yeah, I'd started recording too. Not every conversation, but enough. Enough to build a pattern, enough to show intent. I knew where this was headed. I'd seen it before at other companies and other headlines. The slow bleed of credibility, the gaslight campaign. Turn the sharpest woman in the room into the difficult one, the alarmist, the NAR team player. But here's what they underestimated. I wasn't angry. I was methodical. Every ignored memo, every brushed off Slack ping, every let's take this offline, I tracked it. Outside the system. Private cloud. Air-gapped backup, and an encrypted drive hidden in a hollowed-out copy of Gray's Federal Compliance Digest on my bookshelf. Because if they were going to bury me, I'd make sure I left behind a trail so blindingly clear that even the janitor could trace it to the smoking gun. This wasn't paranoia, it was insurance. They announced it during the Thursday all-hands, complete with donuts and cheap applause. The company had secured a new federal contract, Tier 2, multi-year, heavy on restricted components. Everyone in the auditorium clapped like we'd won the lottery. Dean actually fist-pumped and shouted, "We're back, baby," like he'd just sold a used car for full MSRP. I didn't clap. I just sipped my lukewarm coffee and stared at the pie chart on the projector screen, wondering how many of the compliance review steps had been skipped this time. My guess, all of them. By noon, the shared folder went live. FedContract 2024 Final V6. Final, of course. There's always a V6 final when Dean's steering the ship. I opened the bid package and scanned the files, BOM list, export control matrices, vendor certifications. It took all of 5 minutes for my stomach to knot. The same mistakes. The same goddamn shortcuts. One part number on the BOM, allegedly dual use but clearly on the restricted list, been downgraded in the control sheet. The vendor cert was dated after the submission file metadata, and the approval memo was a Word doc with no actual approvals, just a pasted JPEG of Dean's signature, complete with a smudge mark like someone had screen snipped it off an old email. It was like watching a toddler hide vegetables under a napkin and swear they ate them. I opened my secure folder and began the drill. Downloaded every file, renamed each with a forensic naming scheme, date, time, source path. Grabbed the file properties for every document, screenshotting modified dates and last author. Then I exported the internal comment history on the export control spreadsheet, just in case someone decided to delete the logs later. I added them all to my timeline, my real timeline. I had been quietly building it for weeks now, a meticulous ledger of events, document alterations, meeting removals, compliance failures, Dean's deflections. Cross-referenced by date, action, and file version. At first it had been just for my own sanity. Now it was a dossier. A bulletproof, chronological damning of the exact moment this company decided to treat federal law like a Sudoku puzzle. At 3:37 p.m., I walked into the legal floor to use their high-res scanner. Mine had been reallocated as part of budget cuts, nodded to the usual faces, kept my head down. But then Jenna, the paralegal with the purple hair and a suspiciously encyclopedic knowledge of export clauses, appeared beside me, holding out a fresh cup of coffee. "Thought you might need a refill," she said. I blinked, thanks, but she leaned in just enough to keep her voice low. "If you're documenting," she looked around, then back at me. "Don't stop." My heart skipped, but my face didn't twitch. Just like that, I knew. Someone else had noticed. Someone else had seen the shortcuts, the cover-ups, the way Dean waltzed past due diligence like it was a slow walker at the mall. I took the coffee. "Thanks." She winked, walked off. That night, I stayed late. The office was empty by 6:30, just the hum of the vending machine and the occasional HVAC wheeze. I pulled up the entire contract submission timeline and color-coded the compliance failures. Red, altered documents orange, missing certifications gray, meetings removed from record yellow, Dean's initials with no corresponding review notes. By 8 p.m., I had something terrifyingly clear. A pattern. Dean wasn't just ignoring protocols, he was systematically removing the people who knew the protocols. I wasn't the first. I was just the last one left standing, so I started drafting a cover letter. Not the kind you send to HR or a new employer, the kind you attach to an anonymous submission portal under the Office of Inspector General's whistleblower tab. The kind that includes phrases like willful negligence and deliberate falsification and material misrepresentation of export classification. I wasn't finished yet. I didn't have the kill shot, but the noose was tightening. And every final version Dean signed just gave me one more knot. It was a Thursday. Again, I don't know why the big ones always landed on Thursdays. Maybe because Dean liked the optics of ending the week on a win. Maybe because he assumed people were too fried by then to notice the blood leaking from the seams. The file landed in my inbox at 4:11 p.m. Subject line, final disclosure, filing no further changes. I clicked it open, fingers already cold before I read a single line. There it was. The part I'd flagged twice. Avionics component previously deemed restricted, now miraculously reclassified to a lower-risk category, like the laws of federal export control had just relaxed. They hadn't. The metadata told a louder story. My comment history deleted the timestamp scrub Dean listed as last editor, and the form it bore his initials. Again, no review chain, no sign-off, just his 3 letters curled like graffiti at the bottom of a fake permission slip. I stood up and walked. His office door was half shut, like always, a little metaphor for how he ran things. Open enough to pretend he was listening, closed enough to shut you out when it mattered. He looked up from his second monitor where he was playing fantasy football. I swear to God. Hey, Sunshine, he said without even minimizing the screen. What's the panic today? I held the printed form in front of him, pointing to the line item. This classification is wrong. Was wrong 2 weeks ago. It's still wrong now. He blinked like I'd interrupted his karaoke solo. It passed legal review. No, it didn't. I checked. Legal never saw this version. You removed my comment log. You deleted the flagged content and submitted without audit. He leaned back in his chair, laced his fingers behind his head. You're not an auditor, he said, smug as a possum in a chicken coop. You're a speed bump, and I'm trying to get things moving. Something snapped. Not loudly, not visibly. Just a quiet break like the final thread in a stretched-out rubber band. I looked at him for a moment at that smug little smirk and said nothing, not a word. I turned and walked out. By the time I got to my desk, my hands were steady, no shaking, no second guessing. Just a clarity I hadn't felt in weeks. Months, maybe. I plugged in the encrypted drive, booted up my secure session, and opened the folder. Reg flag dossier master. Inside, 47 documents, 12 memos, 9 altered contracts, 6 redacted timelines, 3 doctored certifications, a video clip of Dean bragging in the break room that no one actually reads export reg unless there's a war. And the crown jewel, a full PDF timeline, start to finish, with every single compliance failure, classified by category and linked to primary source files. I wrote the cover summary from scratch, 5 pages, clean. Professional, cold. I wrote like I was submitting evidence to God. No emotion, no anger, just fact, order, and chronology. At 11:42 p.m., I hovered over the submit button on the federal agency's tip portal. My finger trembled once, just once. Then I clicked upload complete. A confirmation number blinked across the screen. That was it. No dramatic music, no slow motion montage. Just a quiet, empty office, a blinking cursor, and the dull hum of the HVAC kicking on for the night cycle. I pulled the blinds, turned off my monitor, and sat in the dark. Not triumphant, not even relieved, but done. Whatever happened next, it was already set in motion. There would be no walking it back, no plausible deniability. I hadn't just crossed a line, I'd built a bridge, burned it, and mailed the ashes to the oversight office. Dean called me a speed bump, but he was about to learn what happens when you treat federal compliance like a speed limit in a school zone and someone finally calls the cops. It started with a clipboard. A nondescript man in a wrinkled gray suit walked past reception at 10:14 a.m., flashing a badge so quickly that Cheryl at the front desk barely looked up from her Wordle. A second agent followed, then a third. No sirens, no dramatic entrance, just a quiet parade of federal presence cloaked in khakis and polite nods. Dean thought they were auditors. I watched from my desk as he strutted down the hall like a game show host, palm out, teeth gleaming. Gentlemen, he said, clapping his hands like they'd arrived to deliver a trophy. To what do we owe the pleasure? The lead agent, older, thin, voice like dry paper, offered a firm shake. Just a routine compliance check-in. Export controls, documentation audits, that kind of thing. Dean chuckled, great timing. We just won a new contract. Our compliance team's been on top of it. Real Boy Scout stuff. He turned and waved at me through the glass wall. Hey, Sunshine, you're up. I stood slowly, smoothed my blouse, and grabbed a notebook already marked with today's date, though I'd written it in last night. Something in my gut had whispered this was coming. Maybe it was the silence after I submitted the report. Maybe it was the HR meeting that had suddenly been rescheduled indefinitely. Or maybe I just knew. You don't walk through fire without smelling smoke afterward. They led us into conference room B, neutral beige, fluorescent lighting that made everyone look vaguely sick. I took the seat farthest from the door. Dean took center stage like it was a TED talk. Agent #1 pulled out a file, asked a few softballs. Walk us through your export classification process. What internal systems do you use for compliance tracking? Dean answered like he'd memorized a script. Acronyms rolled off his tongue like chewing gum. He name-dropped our document management platform and even threw in the word synergize. Then they turned to me. You're the compliance officer on record? Yes. Dean interrupted with a grin, though lately she's been more of a consultant, really. She's very passionate, loves her rulebook. Sometimes gets a bit dramatic, but hey, y'all have our quirks, right? The agent didn't even look at him. He flipped a few pages in his binder, pausing on a heavily tabbed section. My breath caught, but I kept my face still. Page 7. I knew that chart layout. I'd built it myself in Excel, cross-referencing every export control failure under Dean's initials. Miss Winslow, the agent said calmly, can you explain the process behind this particular classification change? He slid the sheet toward me. Dean squinted. That's already been filed. I reviewed it personally. I glanced at the page, nodded once, then looked at the agent. That classification was altered post-review. My original documentation flagged it as restricted under ECN 3A001. The final file miscategorized it as 3A992. The agent raised an eyebrow. And who made that change? Before I could answer, Dean jumped in, laughing. That's semantics. Look, these forms go through a lot of hands. Sometimes someone forgets to update a code. It's not malicious. Nobody's falsifying anything. The agent kept his eyes on me. Was your flagged version ever submitted? No, I said. It was removed from the shared folder. I have a copy with the original metadata if you'd like to see it. Dean's smile faltered. Let's not overcomplicate. Agent Hash 2 pulled out a separate packet and began comparing pages side by side. Lead agent jotted something in the margin. No reaction, no raised voice. Just slow, mechanical scribbling like he was already fitting puzzle pieces together. Dean leaned back in his chair, still forcing the smile. Look, she's good at her job. Overly cautious, sure, but that's what you want in compliance, right? Agent Hash 1 didn't answer. Instead, he pulled a fresh form from his folder, my timeline summary. I recognized the layout, the date stamps, sequential structure. He flipped to the third page, the color coding, the footnotes, my report. Dean hadn't seen it yet, but he would. I sat still, silent. My heart was pounding loud enough to hear in my throat, but I didn't flinch, didn't blink. Just sat there, letting Dean talk himself deeper into the hole he'd been digging since the day he said nobody checks these things. The agents didn't need me to argue. They already had what they came for. The room had cooled. Not temperature-wise, the vents still hissed recycled air overhead, but something had shifted. The agents no longer asked, they presented. The questions turned into confirmations. The tone, flat, final like math. Dean had stopped smiling. His posture had wilted just enough to notice. The overconfident lean replaced with a twitchy kind of uprightness, like his back knew what was coming before his mouth did. His fingers tapped the conference table like a man testing for hollow spots on a floor he'd just built with stolen nails. Agent Hash 1 slid a document across the table. Not a copy. The original. You could tell by the way he handled it, thumb and middle finger on the edge like he was dealing cards that could cut. He flipped it to the second page, turned it slightly toward Dean, and placed a capped pen beside it. Mr. Wexler, he said, not raising his voice. Is this your signature? Dean leaned forward, squinting like a man peering through fog. His eyes danced, first to the page, then to me, then back to the page. Like maybe the signature had been swapped or forged, or maybe if he stared hard enough, it would become someone else's, but it was his. His initials, DW, scribbled in that same lazy, right-leaning tilt he used on coffee order receipts and office birthday cards. He swallowed, nodded. Yeah, that's me. Agent didn't react. He didn't even glance up. He just ran one finger under a specific line of the document, the one Dean had never read, never noticed, never cared about. That line, the agent said calmly, carries a statutory fine of $1.5 million. Silence. It wasn't shocked silence. It was held breath silence, the kind that builds behind courtroom doors and under church roofs just before the verdict hits. The weight of the number dropped like a dumbbell onto the table, heavy and loud despite no sound. Dean blinked once, then again slower like his brain had finally caught up to the gravity in the room. I didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't even shift in my seat. I had imagined this moment more times than I'll ever admit. Wondered if I'd feel something, triumph, satisfaction, even rage. But in that moment, all I felt was alignment. Like a scale finally tipped back into balance after years of leaning crooked. Dean cleared his throat. Hold on, that line wasn't flagged before. Nobody told me. Agent Hash 2 chimed in, monotone and surgical. Section 13C of the Export Control Reform Act mandates review responsibility for any certifying officer whose initials appear on the submission. Your initials appear here, here, and here. He flipped two more pages, each one a nail. Dean looked toward legal, as if summoning backup with a glance. But our general counsel wasn't in the room, and even if he had been, I doubt he would have spoken. Because what can you say when the evidence is sitting in front of you, wearing your own handwriting like a noose? The agent clicked his pen closed and folded his hands. Dean finally spoke, softly, less sure now. Look, I didn't know that classification carried that level of penalty. I assumed. Agent Hash 1 cut him off without looking up. We'll discuss assumptions later. Then he turned to me. Miss Winslow, do you have access to the original version of this document prior to classification edits? I nodded once. Yes, his pen hovered. Metadata intact? Yes. Another pause. He jotted something down. That was it. No high five, no gavel bang, no dramatic reveal. Just the truth on paper with receipts. Dean exhaled sharply, like he'd been holding onto some thread of plausible deniability and watched it snap between his fingers. I sat motionless, not cold, not smug, just still. Because when you've been dismissed, ignored, erased, silence becomes your armor, your evidence, your win. Dean looked at me like he finally understood I hadn't been exaggerating. I had simply been documenting. And now the documentation was talking back. Dean's voice cracked first, little warble under the bravado, like a man trying to shout through a mouthful of sand. I mean, look, he said, gesturing vaguely toward the document as if it might suddenly get up and defend him. I didn't realize that line meant that. It was part of the templated language, wasn't it? Legal drafts most of this stuff. I sign hundreds of things a week. Agent Hash 1 didn't blink. Mr. Wexler, he said slowly, the language in question wasn't templated. It was part of the attestation clause. That's not boilerplate, that's federal. Dean's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again like a fish that just realized the tank was empty. He reached for the document and tried to flip back a page. Okay, but nobody told me I was attesting to anything this serious. Ignorance, the agent said, so flatly it felt carved into stone, isn't a defense for falsification. That landed like a gavel. Dean stopped moving. Agents weren't looking for drama. They were looking for pattern, structure, intent, and the evidence, my evidence, had already drawn the outline. Agent Hash 2 cleared his throat and added, "We've received multiple internal tips corroborating document manipulation, discrepancies between draft and submission timestamps, classification downgrades inconsistent with review protocol, signatures added post-review." Dean shot me a look, sharp, panicked. Not quite accusatory, but getting there. He still didn't know I was the source, but he knew someone had been keeping records, and in his bones I think he started to guess. He leaned forward again. Maybe some of the drafts got shuffled. Maybe someone in compliance, he paused, calculating, took issue with how fast we moved. Agent Hash 1 calmly asked, "Was Miss Winslow ever removed from the approval chain on export documentation?" Dean hesitated. "I didn't." "She was," Agent Hash 2 confirmed, tapping the timeline packet based on internal calendar logs and version tracking. The temperature in the room dropped about 5 degrees. Someone must have called upstairs because 10 minutes later our general counsel walked in. Sweating. His face was a color I've only ever seen on raw chicken. He gave me a glance, not apologetic, not accusatory, just defeated. Like he knew this moment had been barreling toward us for months and had finally arrived. He leaned into Dean and whispered something. Dean whispered back. There was a lot of whispering. The agents waited. I did not. I just sat there. Still, steady, unflinching. Because at that point, I didn't need to fight. I didn't need to justify. I didn't need to raise my voice or explain my warnings or recount every time Dean had mocked my obsession with box checking. That part was over. The archive was doing the talking now. Every deleted comment, every replaced spreadsheet, every email I'd blind copied to myself, it was all there, stitched together in a dossier that even the most seasoned in-house counsel couldn't spin. Our GC finally turned to the agents. "We'll need time to fully assess what's being presented." Agent Hash 1 cut him off. "You'll have time. But the regulatory hold is active as of 10 a.m. today. No further export activity until this matter is resolved." Dean looked like he might throw up. Legal looked like he already had. And I didn't move, I didn't have to. Because when you've spent years being erased, underestimated, and overtalked, there's a deep, clean silence in watching your paper trail roll out like a steel spine on the table. No rage, no smugness, just power, documented, time-stamped, immutable, and finally heard. By 1:24 p.m., the news broke. Not internally, publicly. An industry compliance watchdog tweeted out a breaking update. Federal review launched into export violations at mid-sized contractor under Section 13C of ECRA. Regulatory hold issued pending investigation. 3 minutes later, it hit the trade publications. Then the local business journal. Then the inboxes of every procurement officer we'd ever worked with. I watched it unfold like a time-lapse of an avalanche. Quiet then thunderous. Vendors pulling out. Partners pausing negotiations. A polite but panicked all-staff email from the CEO insisting our commitment to transparency and full cooperation with federal regulators. It ended with, "Please refrain from commenting externally or on social media." Dean didn't send any messages. He didn't have access anymore. By 3:07 p.m., the badge scanner outside his office had been deactivated. IT boxed up his computer. HR escorted him out, though not dramatically, just quiet enough to avoid spectacle, but fast enough to tell you they were done pretending. "Administrative leave pending investigation," the internal note said, but everyone knew what that really meant. I walked past his empty office once that afternoon. It felt hollow, like a stage after the curtains had dropped and the set had been wheeled away. The whiteboard still had efficiency wins scribbled on it in red marker. A dried-out Expo pen lay beside an empty protein shake bottle. Nobody touched it. Nobody wanted to. The company's general counsel stopped by my desk before close of business. He didn't sit, didn't smile. He just placed a single manila envelope in front of me. Inside was a printout of the official agency notice confirming regulatory hold status, along with a summary of irregularities under investigation. He didn't speak. He just gave a short nod and left. I didn't open the envelope. I didn't need to. At 6:42 p.m., long after the building had emptied, my screen flashed a new message. Subject line, internal tip submission #C 89327. The body was short. No fluff, just, "Miss Winslow, thank you for your precise and complete documentation. It has been instrumental in our investigation. Respectfully, redacted name, Senior Compliance Agent Office of Export Enforcement." No emojis, no confetti, just confirmation. I forwarded it to my personal inbox, double-checked that the archive had synced to my cloud backup, and disconnected the secure drive. Then I stood. I took one last look around the office where I'd given 12 years, watched compliance be reduced to a punchline, watched integrity get treated like a bottleneck. No applause, no ceremony, just me, my laptop, and the hum of truth finally louder than the noise. I closed the lid, zipped the case, slid on my coat, and whispered so quiet even the ghost of Dean couldn't hear it, "You said I was exaggerating." I stepped into the elevator. I just wanted to be accurate. Big thanks for watching, you sneaky seniors. Subscribe to keep the coffee pot brewing revenge. Your ex colleagues won't know what hit him.